Okay, so welcome everybody to webinar 3, and tonight our topic is all about pronunciation. I'm going to hand over to Claire straight away so we can get started. Over to you.
Thanks everybody. Christina, thanks for doing all the housekeeping at the beginning as usual. Hope everyone's had a good day, albeit, online, I imagine. I hope maybe you can get some me time, a little bit of downtime later on. And I think you probably have a break coming up next week anyway, so I hope you can get to chill a little bit. So you may have noticed then from the title slide, this is called RIP, RP. And RIP, as a lot of you will already know, stands for Rest in Peace. And it's a typical epitaph on a gravestone or a tombstone. So that in itself gives us a little indication of what direction we're going in this evening. Okay, so could I have the first slide, please? Thank you. And we're going to think a little bit then about the changing nature of pronunciation in the UK and what might English sound like in the future, in the not too distant future, according to linguists. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just to outline where we're going in tonight's webinar, we are going to take a look at what people in the UK sound like today and what the reason behind that is. We want to think about how and why the soundscape, so that's like the phonological landscape, the soundscape of English, how is that changing and what are the reasons? And of course, because we're all involved in this as English language teachers, what are the implications for us then in the classroom when we think about teaching pronunciation to our learners? So generally, the whole course, I would say, that Liz and I have created is about giving you a snapshot of English in the world today, and especially in the UK today. And we're covering the core themes of vocabulary change and development. Grammar change is coming up then after the break. And today we're talking about phonological change. So what emerges when we think about the English language today is that we can't ignore culture, community, and communication, and above all, the process of change. Okay, so thank you. The next slide, please. Now, we're going to kick off with a little task for you, or a couple of little tasks for you to do together. And we're going to start with a personal example from my own teaching context. So some months ago, I was using a lesson on homophones from a Headway course book. We all know Headway, probably. It's one of the world's bestsellers. And it was fairly low level. I'm going to say, I think it was B1. And out of these pairs of words, which do you think I had an issue with? So in your group, in breakout, what you're going to do is try these homophones and reach a decision. And then there's also another little task on the next slide where we're going to get you to discuss what you understand by some of the three key terms for this session. Okay, so you've got two little jobs to do then in breakout. Think about the homophones, right, the pairs of words. Which pair do you think I had an issue with? And also check together just very quickly, what do you all understand by these three key terms? Because we're going to need to know what these are going forward into the rest of the PowerPoint. Okay.
Yes. Now, I have shared all of this in a Word document in the chat. So can you see the Word document in the chat, and are you able to open it up? If anyone is having an issue with that or does not have access to the document, in the next 5 or 10 minutes. If you can raise your hand so I can see you up there, and I can try to make sure that I post some information in the chat in the room that you're going into. Is that okay? I'm assuming that everybody's okay because no one is saying that they haven't got the document. All right, so we're going to give you some time in breakout rooms, just also to say hello to each other too. About 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes max. All right, have fun. Okay, so we have everybody in breakout rooms. I will pause the recording for the time being.
Right, let's stay on that one. That's great because that was the first task, really. So these were presented as pairs of homophones. And that's a very typical exercise for students to be shown. Okay, now I wonder if anybody tested them out, read them across from left to right, and I wonder if anybody noticed anything in particular. Okay, so hole, hole, higher, higher, road, road, sure, sure, flower, flower. Right, did you notice anything there? Okay, so sure, sure, and sure, for me, I'm Scottish, okay? So I grew up in Glasgow. So for me, these two words are not a pair of homophones because I go sure and sure. I have two different monophthongs going on there when I pronounce these. So, okay, that's a fair point, I think, to make at this stage. And if we can go on to the next slide that you were discussing, some of the key concepts. Now, you might have got into discussion about these. Okay, what is RP? Well, we need to take a look at these three things in a little bit more detail before we move on. All right, so the type of RP stands for received pronunciation. Now, what on earth does received mean anyway? So a point of semantics here. Well, received, it's an archaic adjectival use, and it means accepted or approved. And that in itself gives you a clue as to how that type of accent was perceived once upon a time. Okay. The type of RP that we find in course books or in the literature is what we call archaic RP. And RP has always been seen by people as a standard accent. It's also been called the Queen's English, Oxford English, BBC English, and it's an accent that has long been associated with royalty, the government, the law courts, the Church of England, public schools, and elite universities. Okay. So RP itself is a neutral accent. It was developed at the end of the 18th century among the upper classes, who developed it purposely to pronounce words without any trace of regional accent. So they did this to remove themselves from the plebs, from the working classes. It was definitely a class and status marker. And traditionally, as I said, it was viewed as the correct, proper way to speak. All right. So next one, please. Let's move on to what we understand by Cockney. A bit of Cockney. Okay. So Cockney, as some people were discussing with me in breakout, it's traditionally the accent of a very, very narrow social group, the East End of London, which was an area of very much working class London. People have moved out of the East End and the accent has spread a little bit along the Thames estuary. And now we have a more modern phenomenon called estuary English. Okay, now what exactly is estuary English? Well, it became noticed and documented in the 1990s. It attracted a lot of media attention because it was a sort of happy medium between archaic and posh RP at one end and informal Cockney at the other end. So it's what we might call a hybrid of RP and Southern English. Estuary English is associated with what we call upwardly mobile young people, and it is expected to one day replace archaic RP. If you know the British television chef Jamie Oliver, he is a very good example of estuary English, because on the one hand, he's clearly not posh and RP, and yet on the other hand, he's not a true Cockney. So he's kind of in the middle between one and the other, and he's a good example of estuary English. He's got a very distinct way of talking. Okay, so let's move on then to one more thing that you were discussing, and that is MLE. What on earth is MLE? Well, Multicultural London English. It is a way of sounding that is particular to modern day London. And it's a blend of Cockney, Jamaican, West African and Indian accents. It's very much influenced by the communities of people around it. It's been emerging since the 1980s in parts of London where there's been very high levels of immigration, and it's prevalent in sort of Black British rap music. So some people say it's the rebirth of Cockney. Okay, so we've got we've got this sort of, remember, if we say that RP is archaic, it's what we call archaic RP. Now, as you said before, you know, I've got a slight Scottish accent, although I speak standard English. You know, all my students understand me. I speak, and most people I know speak what's called modern RP or contemporary RP. Okay, so let's get on then to our next slide, please. Thank you. All right. Okay, so the chart, the phonemic chart. Now, do you use the phonemic chart in your teaching? At the school where I work, there is this chart on every single wall in every classroom. Okay, and we are taught, when I became a teacher 32 years ago, I was taught how to use the chart. Now, what is represented on the chart? Okay, well, you probably know this. The 44 symbols represent the sounds used in educated British English speech, what we call RP, archaic RP. And remember, that is the educated accent associated with the southeast of England. Now, the chart, therefore, has no representation of regional variation. For example, me as a Scot, I'm from Scotland, and you might know then that in Scotland we have Loch Ness, right? It's a famous body of water. It's not a lake, it is a loch. That is a Scottish word, okay? But is there a ch sound on the chart? No, of course there isn't, because that is a Scottish sound. And there's no representation of that sound on this Southern English RP chart. Okay, so remember, going back to the problem of sure and shore, the vowel sounds were different to me as a Scottish speaker. The key thing to remember about archaic RP is that it's accentless, and it was a neutral accent developed, as I said, at the end of the 18th century by the upper classes, who developed it to be able to pronounce words without any trace of regional accent. If you think for a minute about who embodies archaic RP today in the UK, if you were asked to describe the British actor Hugh Grant, most people, the first adjective they say is posh boy. Well, exactly, because Hugh Grant is a classic archaic RP speaker. All right. You listen to David Cameron, Hugh Grant, Boris Johnson, the actress Helen Mirren. You listen to the sounds that come out of their mouths. You have no idea as to where these people were born, where these people went to university, or where they live nowadays. And that is because they are examples of archaic RP speakers. Okay. All right. So remember, with my slight Scottish accent, I am a speaker of what we call modern or contemporary RP. Okay. Let's have the next one then, please. All right. Now, it sounds like we're giving RP a lot of bad press, that we're slating it. So let's see if this is justified or not. What percentage of the UK population do you think are archaic RP speakers today? You know, the Hugh Grants of the UK. How many of them are out there? Pop your guess in the chat and let's have a go. Okay.
Okay, we're getting 2 guesses of 30%. You mean modern RP, right? Yes.
I mean archaic RP.
Archaic.
Yeah.
Archaic.
Right. Who still sounds like the Queen and Hugh Grant?
And David Cameron and Boris Johnson.
Not like me and David Cameron and Boris Johnson. Yeah.
Okay, so 36, 20, 10, 10, 20, 10, or less than 10, 30, less than 5.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Going down there. All right.
Starting with a high number, we're going lower and lower.
Okay.
Shall we see?
Let's have a look. All right. So this might blow your mind. All right. Well, now, here we go. So you'll find if you consult someone like David Crystal on this, the phenomenon of, you know, who is nowadays a kind of archaic RP speaker, it's around 2% only of the UK population who speak in that manner. Now remember, RP is the accentless mode of pronunciation that reveals nothing about your geographical roots. Okay. In the past, RP had very high status, as we said, indicating that you were an educated family, educated speaker, or you were a member of royalty. And this transferred, this model, this accent transferred into English language teaching. And this is how we as teachers fit in, because RP for decades has been used as the model for pronunciation teaching. Coursebook materials continue to use it. Okay, so if only 2% of the UK are actual RP speakers, what on earth do most people sound like today? Let's have a look at the next slides. Okay, and we're going to try something.
Yes.
In a moment. Okay. All right.
Try this.
Let's try this. All right. So let's pull together what we talked about with that sort of archaic RP. The Queen. Think about the Queen in the recent Netflix series, The Crown, or Downton Abbey. You know, those who lived upstairs. All right. And let's try this greeting or this salutation. Let's try it 3 ways. Okay. So are people able to get into a breakout room for this?
So yes, I'm very happy to put people into breakout rooms. Do you want to